First Samuel 16, starting in verse 1. The Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you mourn for Saul, since I've rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I'm sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I've chosen one of his sons to be king." But Samuel said, "How can I go? If Saul hears about me, he's going to kill me." The Lord said, "Well, take a heifer with you and say, 'I have come to sacrifice to the Lord.' Invite Jesse to sacrifice, and I will show you what to do. You're to anoint for me the one I indicate." Samuel did what the Lord said. When he arrived to Bethlehem, the elders of the town trembled when they met him, and they asked, "Do you come in peace?" Samuel said, "Yeah, I come in peace. I've come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourself and come to sacrifice with me." Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. And when they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and thought, "Surely this guy is the Lord's anointed. He stands here before the Lord." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Don't consider the appearance or the height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." And Jesse called Abinadab, and he had him pass in front of Samuel. But Samuel said, "The Lord's not chosen him either." And then Jesse then got Shammah, and he passed by. But Samuel said, "Nor has the Lord chosen him." Then Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. But Samuel said to him, "The Lord has not chosen these." So he asked Jesse, "Are there any more? Are these all your sons you have?" "There's still one, the youngest," Jesse answered. "He's tending to the sheep." Samuel said, "Send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives." So he sent him on his way, and he brought him in, and he was glowing with health. He was on handsome bugger, and he had fine appearances, and he was good looking. Then the Lord said, "Rise and anoint him. This is the one." So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. And Samuel went to Ramah. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. You can check out now. That's the simple message for you this morning, if you want a simple message. But it's much more complicated than that. You ready? We have a different way of seeing this morning. God looks, but he does not look exactly like how we look. He looks in a much different kind of way. God gazes with a different set of eyes. This morning, we're talking about the gaze of God. Did you know that our eyes were meant to gaze, to look steadily and intently at things? Our eyes were not meant for reading. In fact, in this book that I'm reading, it's called my annual kind of take care of myself book right here, my health book. He actually says that literacy makes our eyes get weaker. And I was thinking, oh, more reason for me to not read then. But anyway, but we've adjusted, we've evolved to be people that learn how to read. But our eyes, the original purpose of our eyes was to gaze upon things of value, things like food, things like shelter, to find possible threats, to look intently upon things. And I see this in my friend. If you know any hunter or outdoorsman or any fisherman, you know that one of the skills that they need is to be able to gaze and find hints and clues on where the target species is. It's one thing to have this kind of gaze, but it's another thing to witness it. It is super impressive. Just imagine sitting on a boat in the middle of the ocean and you're trying to find a buoy. So you're trying to find floats. You're trying to find birds to indicate where the fish is going to be, but everything is just engulfed in one big blue mass of ocean. Hard to pick out anything in that stuff. Or just imagine tracking down pigs at daybreak or sundown, and everything's getting dark. And the problem is that the pigs are dark. They're black. The boys are black. Hard to see anything, but the skilled hunter gazes on animal tendencies to spot out them in even the hardest condition. One of the most impressive things, I just knocked out my can you hear me? One of the most impressive gazes that I have witnessed is having the masterful Tako Eye. Tako is Japanese for octopus. And when putting the words taco and eye together, Kamaaina, the locals, describe someone with the extraordinary ability to find the octopus on the reef. And as you've probably guessed, it's extremely hard to do because octopus have evolved to be masterful hiders because they're delicious to eat. Everything wants to eat them. Here's a little exercise for you. Can you spot the taco? Where that bug stay? Where's that taco? Once you see it, you can't not unsee it. You see it? It's right there. Taco is right there, hiding on the coral head. Amazing. You know, we're talking about the Tako Eye of God this morning. God has amazing Tako Eye. God is able to find the prize on the reef. God is able to assess any landscape, any structure, any scenario, any situation, and truly find the value in it. God gazes upon the things that is most important, even in times when no one can see it or no one can perceive it. In the most difficult times, God can see, the gaze of God can find what's important. This is a difficult situation for Israel. This is a difficult situation for Samuel, who was mourning over Saul's disestablishment as king. And it's kind of strange because Samuel was the guy that didn't even want a king to begin with. In fact, he was the one that was warning everybody, your desire for a king is an evil thing to ask because you're mimicking the nations around you that want warmongering kings. But not only that, you're rejecting and you're replacing God as our king, as our leader. And you think that Samuel would be rejoicing over God ripping the kingdom away from Saul's disobedient and oppressive hands. But Samuel is mourning. Samuel is weeping. Samuel is grieving. And what's even more strange in the verses before this in chapter 15 is that God is sorrowful. God is regretting making Saul king. What do we do with this? How do we make sense of this? Have you ever taken on a situation that you didn't ask for? But even more so, have you ever taken on a situation you didn't have the solutions for? But even more so, did you take on a situation knowing that there were no solutions, that you know the failure that was inevitable. That's the position Samuel was in. And it's kind of the position this guy is in. I'm sorry, just a second here. This is Muhammad Bazik. Muhammad Bazik is a widower. He's a cancer survivor. And he's the father of a disabled son, and he's been fostering children for 35 years in Los Angeles. You might have heard of him. John and Danielle might have heard of him. And he and his former wife have had 80 children gone through their home. But for the past 25 years, he's exclusively fostered terminally ill children. Children that had no hope of living. And in one interview, the reporter asks the question everybody's wondering. There's so much heartbreak, and yet you keep doing this. And Bazik says, yes, these children need somebody. And to me, death is a part of life, and I'm glad that I can help these kids go through this spiritual visitation. I help them. I be with them. I comfort them. I love them. I want them to feel that they have care from somebody, that somebody loves them. Like Muhammad, like Samuel, and like many people of God, we can find ourselves giving, directing, teaching, mentoring, loving, and even standing in contentious and awkward places for people, knowing the grim end that is in sight. In giving our hearts to really hard situations, for whatever reason, we get attached. We grow an attachment, even though we know that failure is inevitable. We find ourselves in situations we did not ask for, giving ourselves to problems we do not want, that we did not create, taking ownership of things, giving our hearts to situations that will not work out. People might call that stupidity. People might call that unhealthy, delusional. The world might call it insanity, but I call it passion. Passion is about loving desperately and deeply in the most disastrous of situations. Living in a world that is transactional, meaning where we're taught to at least break even on our efforts, on our investments. It's easy to give to things that guarantee a return. It's hard to give things that have no guarantee. But that's what biblical passion is. Passion is about loving others, even if you don't know whether or not your efforts will get a return. Passion is about caring so deeply about something or someone that you care to the point of suffering. You care to the point of discomfort. To live without passion is to be numb. God is wanting to work with people who are passionate, who feel and act deeply for others, to not be numbed by life, to be desensitized by life. The fear behind passion is not looking stupid by doing or saying dumb things. I know that too well. You might know that well too. But the fear behind passion is being left alone in our emptiness. After loving so deeply, after giving so much, being left alone in that dark place, asking and wondering, was the effort worth it? Was it worth my time? Was it worth my love? Did it amount to anything? But Samuel was not left alone. We are not left alone in our grief, in our pain. God is there, grieving alongside us for a better future. God is with us in our pain, our grief, so that we could see hope, the true hope of newness that God is bringing. God is with us in the pain, but God does not keep us in the pain, but through the pain, He shows us the plans of newness that God has. God breaks the silence and begins to show Samuel the path of newness. Notice that God doesn't just say, suck it up, brah. It's done. Saul is over with. Just pick yourselves up and get moving. No. God comes to Samuel and says, why are you mourning? Let's move forward. I have something else in mind. Comfort Samuel, and he gives assurance. He gives him what he needs to move forward. It's like comforting a child that has gone over the 10-minute mark on a crying fit where they start to choke in convulsion. You simply pat them and you say, Pow, Pow, it's okay. It's okay. We begin to see through the eyes of God in moments when we need God's comfort the most. Through the sorrow, God's comfort prepares us to see how God sees. So God makes a plan and eventually leads Samuel to the house of Jesse to sacrifice, but proceeds to have some kind of pageantry or something like that. And it's all for the purpose of appointing a new king of Israel. And in this process, God tells Samuel not to consider the outward appearance. How do we do that? That's really hard to do because all we see is the outward appearance. We are visual creatures. We notice textures and colors and shapes and sizes, and things catch our eye and we're influenced by those things. But apparently, there's another way of seeing beyond the naked eye that doesn't make much sense to us. There's a restaurant in Israel called the Blackout Restaurant that hires deaf and blind people in their service. But the kicker is that they serve a full course meal in pitch darkness so that those who can see can experience the complexity of food without any sight at all. Only tasting. There's a different way to taste. There's a different way to see. We've been emphasizing up until this point our thinking, causing us to go in and examine the work of God in our own selves, to be more like God, to be more like Christ. But the call this morning is to not look into ourselves, but to look amongst others, to see the work of God in other people's hearts and other people's minds. Christianity is not only about the self. Maybe it's not about the self at all, but it's about neighbor. It's about loving neighbor. It's about recognizing the work of God in our neighbor's life, having the Tako Eye of God. How do we build this spiritual muscle? How do we recognize God cultivating a heart in other people? I'm not too sure. We have to figure that out together to make it really practical. It's going to take a lot of conversation, which is a plug for midweeks. But one thing I do like, even though it's really awkward sometimes, is sitting people down in the middle of a room or a Zoom room and sharing with them a frenzy of things that we appreciate about the person. I like that. I like that because I think we're supposed to recognize the good of God in others as much or even before ourselves. And sometimes we can't even see the good that God is doing in our own lives. It takes another person to do that. But if we're going to take our cues from 1 Samuel 16 this morning, I think we start to see the way God sees by looking in the forgotten places, leaving no stone unturned. After all of Jesse's sons had passed through Samuel, Samuel asked, "Are these all the kids?" Well, Jesse said, "There's David, but he's in the sheep's pen. He's outside in the back of the woods playing with the sheep." I don't know if that's what he was thinking. I'm just inserting my own thoughts there, but it's fun to think that way. Well, David said, "Go get him." And as David passed through, there was a small affirmation from God that this is the one. The work of God comes from the field, comes from the forgotten places. It's in the field that God teaches love. It's under the stars that God teaches care. It's with the sheep that God teaches the heart of God, the shepherding heart of God. It's in the field where things like prestige, affluence, and success, and any other skills that the world says is important doesn't really matter. It's in the forgotten places that God is cultivating a heart after his own heart. We want to see the way God sees. Stop looking in places that are sexy. Stop looking in places that are glamorous. Stop looking in places that are powerful. Stop looking in places that strive for personal success. We'll go out into the humble places, into the modest, unassuming places like a field. Call out to those places. And there we might find the work of God. We might find the Spirit of God. Jesus died outside the city gates. Jesus was an ordinary carpenter. But Jesus changed the world because he was raised in the forgotten places. Amen.